Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're happy to have you with us today. My name is Carrie Ferd, and I'm your host for the Manta Trends webcast, EMV 20 Days and Counting. Manta wants to thank EMV expert Derek Carpenter for generously donating his time and expertise, and Bank of America Merchant Services for presenting today's webcast. We hope you'll tweet about today's event using hashtag MantaTrends. I want to take a few minutes to cover some important housekeeping items about the event. Let's first talk about your screen. During the webcast, you should see a slide area which you can resize and make bigger. Left of that is the media player, under it a box called the resource list, and some widgets. All of the widgets open and close, and I encourage you to check them out. I want to point out three widgets in particular: the resource list, the help widget, and the Q&A widget. The resource list is open under the media player. You'll find links and documents there that you can open and explore to learn more about EMV. If you're having technical difficulties, please click on the help widget, the one with the question mark icon. My colleague Mel is answering your technical questions, so just send her a note. Now I'd like to introduce Graham, our community manager, who will be fielding your questions today.
Hello everyone, I'm Graham and I'm the community manager here at Manta. I'll be helping with questions today. I know you'll have a lot of questions about our content once we get going, so ask them anytime. Just click on the Q&A widget and type in your answer, and I'll push your questions along to Carrie and Derek. They'll be answering questions during the last 5 minutes of the webinar, so please ask them as soon as you think of them. Quick shameless plug, come on over to the community after the webinar. We'll be hosting a discussion with Derek, and you can join us to answer any lingering questions you may have about EMV.
Thanks, Graham. Let's get down to business. I'd like to start off with a quick poll. Will your business be ready to process EMV chip cards by October 1st? I'll just wait a few seconds and then I'll pull up the results. Wow, 100% of you will not be ready by October 1st. Which is a great reason to discuss EMV further today. I'd like to introduce our expert, Derek Carpenter. Derek is the Senior Vice President of Industry Solutions and Platforms at Bank of America Merchant Services. He oversees product, platform, and portfolio enablement and technical consulting. In his current role, Derek is responsible for a variety of new and existing product initiatives, including the implementation of EMV-compatible devices across Bank of America Merchant Service product offerings. To learn more about Derek, click on the speaker widget. We're glad to have you today, Derek. Now I'd like to hand it over to Derek. Derek, can you explain what EMV is exactly? I know up until I started researching for this webcast, I didn't know what EMV was, and I've seen stats suggesting the same is true for small business owners.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. EMV is actually stands for Europay, MasterCard, and Visa, and was a agency started in Europe to help give protection to payments. And really what EMV does, it's a chip-based technology, much like what you're seeing here on the screen. That chip is placed into credit and debit cards, and what it does is it allows the issuers and people processing those transactions using those cards to know that that card is legitimately the card it was supposed to be and not a counterfeit. It's very difficult to replicate a card with that specific chip on it, and by having that chip on the card, it almost renders the card not capable of being replicated in a card-present or face-to-face environment where someone's coming to your store and using a card. That's what EMV technology is, Carrie.
Thanks, Derek. On October 1st of this year, just 20 days from now, there will be a credit card fraud liability shift from credit card providers to merchants if merchants are not prepared to accept EMV cards by that date. Derek, can you explain to our listeners today why this is happening?
Yeah. So if you think about the payments world, like I said, this started over in Europe, and pretty much EMV is a common standard used around the world. The United States is really the last place that EMV has not gone to. And what we've seen because of that, because we've always had the standard mag stripe technology that's on the back of every credit card and debit card, is that a lot of that fraud has come to the U.S. Well, now, we're taking the steps in this marketplace to implement EMV technology. And so it's going to add added security, and it's going to ensure that we start to push that fraud out of the U.S. Marketplace going forward. And what does it mean to implement EMV? A lot of customers and merchants probably have never seen an EMV transaction here in the U.S., but you'll notice many cards in the U.S. are now starting to show up with the chip, like you see on your screen. And instead of swiping it like you would a mag stripe at a terminal, instead you insert the card or dip it. And you can kind of see you leave that card in there, and the chip in the terminal actually engages with the chip on the card. It validates that that card is a legitimate card and is not a counterfeit, and it creates a one-time token that is then sent to the bank for authorization. And then the same things happen like any other transaction. You either sign a receipt or you enter a PIN, and then you are prompted to remove the card.
Thank you, Derek. Derek, do all businesses need to be EMV ready by October 1st? What's going to happen if merchants are not prepared to accept EMV cards by October 1st, which, according to our poll, that's all of our audience today?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think when you think about EMV, there's a concept that Visa and MasterCard and the other national brands like American Express and Discover have something called liability shift. So today, when counterfeit fraud happens, merchants don't see it. It's really contained inside of the issuer. So when a card is counterfeited and used and fraud occurs, really the consumer doesn't end up paying for it. The issuers kind of absorb that. Well, going forward, what happens is there's a liability shift. And so it gives an incentive to both the issuer who creates the debit or credit card to make it EMV compliant, and it also gives an incentive to the merchant to implement EMV technology. So should you and your small business do it? I think one of the things you have to ask yourself is, do I operate in a space that is highly susceptible to counterfeit fraud? It's very likely that if you operate in a place with prepaid gift cards or jewelry or electronics, that's a much more likely environment where people would try to use counterfeit cards in your environment and likely to have fraud. So you probably would want to think about becoming EMV compliant. If you sell food, a small bakery shop or tacos or something like dry cleaning that's a little bit harder to take and turn into cash after the fact, maybe you don't need to do it as quickly. But I think it is something that everyone should be looking at their business, understanding if it's the right thing for them to do, and then putting a plan in place to become EMV compliant on your own terms.
Most of our audience today, Derek, have either mobile readers or just 1 or 2 points of sale in their storefronts. What do they need to do to prepare for the October 1st liability shift?
This is another great question. So we at Bank of America Merchant Services have been actively engaging our clients for about 18 months now, and I think what I would recommend you do is follow back up with your business consultant at the payment organization that you work with that helps you meet your payment needs, and if not, call Bank of America Merchant Services and we can help you out there too. But really sit down and talk with them, work with them to understand a few key things. One, do you have an environment that is capable of doing EMV? Many terminals in the marketplace today already can do EMV. They're just not enabled. So maybe all you need is a software download, and that's going to be a very low-cost way to become EMV capable. Another alternative is maybe you just need a peripheral, almost like a USB plug-in. Think about it like a mouse that you plug into your laptop, but it actually is a peripheral that can take an EMV chip card and allow for PIN entry. And then thirdly, you may need a new piece of hardware. Many of the mobile solutions on the market today are going to have to be replaced with an EMV-capable solution, as well as many of the terminals that are out there in the marketplace are also going to need to be replaced. So the best thing you can do is, again, make a decision around what kind of risk you think your organization has, and then follow up with your consultant that you work with on payments and walk through the options based on what type of device you already have in place.
Thank you, Derek. Now we'll open up the Q&A portion of the webcast. We'll get to a few of your questions live today, but after that, Derek will be taking questions during an hour-long Ask the Expert session on the Manta community, which is linked in the resource list on your console today. So Derek, the first question I have for you is, what about card not present transactions?
Great question. So EMV is a technology that really pushes counterfeit fraud out of what we call face-to-face transactions or card-present transactions, meaning that the customer standing in front of you swiping the card today. EMV and the chip show up in that environment. So really, EMV does not impact an organization that only does card not present or e-commerce transactions. So that's another great point to make here, is that if you run strictly an e-commerce environment, EMV is not really going to be a big change for you. And to be honest, the liability shift doesn't even apply to that. So it will be business as usual after October 1st in the card not present environment. But in the card present environment, that's where EMV and the liability shift really take place.
Great, Derek, thank you. I have another question for you. We pre-ordered the chip reader from Apple for Square transactions. According to Apple, they said they are supposed to cover fraudulent issues while still swiping EMV cards until we receive the reader. Is this something we should still have concern about?
I would refer back to whatever arrangement they have with Apple. I think you'd have to look at your payment provider and probably get that conversation up to them on who is the acquirer that's helping you process your transactions, and make sure you validate that with them.
All right, Derek, I have one more question that we'll answer during the live event today, and then I encourage listeners to head over to our community to ask any further questions before we wrap up today. If you have an EMV terminal but still swipe the card using the mag strip, are you liable if it's a fraudulent card?
Great question. So the way EMV technology actually works is that when that card is created and that chip is put on it, it has coding built into both the mag stripe and the chip that say this is a chip card. And if you have a terminal that is chip and EMV enabled, actually what happens when a customer walks up and swipes a chip-enabled card in a chip-enabled terminal, if they swipe it with the mag stripe, the terminal is smart enough to say, that's a chip card and I read chips, please insert it. And it will prompt the customer to insert it instead of swiping it. So terminals are smart enough and they will handle that situation.
Wonderful. Thank you for the clarification, Derek. We've got to wrap it up now, but be sure to sign up for our September 16th expert webinar on sales and use tax basics for small business owners, which is linked in the resource list, along with several great articles that Bank of America Merchant Services provided on EMV. Thanks again to them for presenting today's webcast and to everyone for attending. Now head on over to the community to have Derek answer any remaining questions you may have. Thank you.